And we're live. I am currently sitting in what is still just an unfinished basement, which now has a red wall and other red walls as well. But this is soon to be my own gym.
3 weeks later.
The purpose of today's live video is going to be to discuss calories. Basically, how many calories do you need to eat for growing, off season, whatever you want to call that, and or how many calories do you need to eat for cutting, getting lean, contest prep, etc., weight loss. Now, when you hear me say that, you're probably thinking, oh, well, that's a really vague topic and there's no all-encompassing answer for everyone, and you're 100% right if you think that. I'm not going to give anybody specific numbers. I'm not going to say any specific numbers because those numbers are going to be different for every single individual. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misconceptions about this. I think social media has driven a lot of people to believe a lot of crazy things about calories and how many you need, or how many you should reduce, and things like that. So I kind of want to get to the bottom of that with this video. As a matter of fact, in the past week, I had 3 different girls message me and essentially ask how many calories they should be eating and for what purposes. 2 of them actually have relatively similar body compositions in terms of like their height, their build, etc. And one was worried that she was eating too many calories and thought that the number of calories she was eating might be excessive. The other wants to gain weight and assumes, and rightfully so, that she wasn't eating enough calories. The number that they were both at was actually pretty similar, which is really funny because they're both taking, again, with similar body compositions, relatively similar in age, not super similar, but kind of. They're eating approximately the same amount of calories, or at least very close. One thinks she's eating too many, one thinks she's not eating enough. Exactly, that's where I'm going with this, is that even if, on paper you're very similar to another person, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should be eating the same amount of calories as them, even if your goals are the same. For them, their goals are totally different from each other, so, their assumptions about their calories are, perfectly logical. Ironically, the third girl that asked the question is a lot different than, one of the others, but they actually both had just had babies very recently and were underweight. They were having trouble keeping weight on, and they both wanted to gain weight, and both assumed that they weren't eating enough because they weren't gaining weight, which is absolutely the truth. But anyway, it prompted me to want to discuss what's the appropriate amount of calories for whether you're trying to gain weight, lose weight, build muscle, get lean, etc. A lot of people who get paid to do nutrition for others that are throwing around this this concept that people undereat and that you need to be eating this absurd amount of calories, and if you're not, you're starving yourself and whatever. I got news for you. That's correct for a very, very small number of people, a total niche group of people with insane metabolic genetics. That's true. You need to eat a ton of calories if you're a person who can handle a ton of calories. If you're a person who can't, then you can't, and you don't need to. You need to be, the simple answer is, if you want to grow, if you want to gain muscle, if you're not focused on being as lean as possible, you need to be in a caloric surplus. Now, what does that mean? A caloric surplus is anything above maintenance. If you are gaining weight consistently, which first of all, I don't think you should gain too much at once, but if you're gaining weight consistently, you're in a caloric surplus. There's no way to beat that. The problem is there's a lot of people putting around a message that you can lose weight in a caloric surplus. Physically impossible. If you have clients that this is actually happening to, you have essentially defied the laws of thermodynamics, which that's an instant Nobel Prize. It's the highest honor in the scientific community if you're able to defy the laws of thermodynamics. So all of you coaches out there that are telling your clients you should eat more if you want to lose weight, show me. You know, it's like throwing a ball up in the air and expecting it to just keep going further and further and further up into the air into outer space. It's never going to happen because of gravity. No one's ever been able to defy the laws of gravity the same way you're not able to defy the laws of thermodynamics. So the easy answer to if you want to gain weight, if you want to build muscle, if you want to grow, if you're in off season, is you need to eat in a caloric surplus. Now, I'm going to take that a step further because a lot of people think, okay, it's off season. My coach said I need to be in a caloric surplus, and so I'm just going to eat as many calories as I can. That doesn't make sense either. You know, getting away with cheat meals constantly doesn't work either because the surplus that you need to be in is actually rather insignificant. Being in a minimal caloric surplus for an extended period of time works extremely well. Being in a massive caloric surplus for a short period of time is an easy way to get insulin resistant, accrue a ton of body fat, accrue new fat cells, to where that inevitably is going to make it more and more difficult for you to lose weight when it comes time to want to get lean. You know, the insulin resistance thing is actually going to make it a lot harder for you to build muscle as well. So this whole process where you're in a caloric surplus to try to build muscle, you're actually, if you're eating in too much of a surplus, you're not even going to be able to do that. You're essentially doing nothing but getting fatter for no reason. So again, to these coaches out there that are spreading this message that you need to be, if you're not eating X amount of calories or more, you're starving yourself or whatever with your metabolism, that's complete nonsense. Don't listen to that for a minute. The amount of calories you need to eat is going to vary completely from person to person. So if you have some coach out there or even just some arbitrary person out there talking about, you know, if you're a male and you're like, oh, I'm eating 6,000 calories a day and they still are relatively lean, don't think that just because they're doing it, you can do it. Or a female. I used to have a female client not long ago, less than a year ago, about a year ago, that was shredded. I mean, had like veins in her abs, that was eating like 3,500 calories every single day. That doesn't mean that every girl can do that. And in fact, hardly any girls can do that. So you need to know what your metabolic rate is. And you don't need to know the specific number, but you do need to keep in tune with what your body is doing and you need to eat a consistent amount of calories for, you know, a consistent amount of time for you to determine what your body's doing. So if you're eating 2,000 calories a day, we'll just use an easy number, and you're staying the same, you're not gaining, you're not losing, then that's about what your total metabolic rate most likely is. If you're not going to change anything with like training or cardio or whatever else, 2,000 calories is about what you need to maintain. If you want to grow, just go slightly above that and continue increasing it until you hit a point where you're gaining more body fat than you want to, and then drop it back down a little bit, but just always be in a relatively small caloric surplus. It's simple as that. But if your metabolic rate is around 2,000 and you decide, well, I need to be in a surplus, so I'm going to eat 4,000 calories, you will just put on body fat very quickly. And in addition to putting on the body fat, like I said, you're going to accrue new fat cells, which is again going to make it easier to gain more and more body fat, and insulin resistance is going to increase the more body fat you accrue. In doing so, you are, again, not going to be able to build much muscle. You're not going to look good, you're not going to feel good, and getting lean is going to be a lot more of a task when it comes time to want to do that. So, switching gears and if anyone has questions right off the bat, I have no problem with people asking questions right in the middle. Switching gears to getting lean. How many calories should you eat while getting lean? And there's a huge misconception with this as well. There's a lot of people out there that think, you know what, let me revert back to this gaining weight thing. If you are eating so much that it requires an absurd amount of cardio to prevent you from gaining weight, first of all, that to me is just common sense. Just don't do that. If you legitimately need to do an hour of cardio every day to counter the massive caloric surplus you've put yourself in, to prevent yourself from just putting on tons and tons of unnecessary weight, that is the most inefficient way of going about an off season you could possibly do. Because you're still gonna put on body fat, and you're probably gonna put on more body fat because of the amount of cortisol you're gonna produce from stressing your body, constantly having to do cardio, and the necessity to be in the gym for excessive amounts of time. You have a life, you know, this whole bodybuilding fitness thing is great. I love it. It's a huge passion of mine. It's why I do this for a living. But I don't want to spend 3 hours a day in the gym. I don't think anyone really does. A lot of people will pretend like they do because they think it makes them look tough or whatever, but nobody wants that. And it gets in the way of your work life, your family life, your social life, you know, your relationship. If you have kids, your time away from your kids, it's completely unnecessary. So again, if you just eat in a minimal caloric surplus and maybe throw in a cheat meal here and there just for sanity's sake, there's nothing wrong with that. That's gonna work. You're gonna build muscle that way. You're gonna maintain some insulin sensitivity. You're not gonna be, you know, pissed off because now I can't take my shirt off, you know, at the pool, or, you know, I gotta wear a one-piece swimsuit because I gotta hide my stomach kind of shit. There is a limit. Everyone has a limit to where your metabolism is gonna go. You know, people like to claim the whole reverse dieting thing. If you slowly increase calories over time, your metabolism speeds up. And it does for a while. And at a certain point, that's not going to continue happening. Because you could just be diligent and be eating 100,000 calories a day if you're diligent long enough. You think you eat that much that your body's going to maintain its body fat? Absolutely not. Everyone has a genetic threshold you're going to hit. And after that point, you're just putting on body fat and increasing insulin resistance. So if you think that you have to eat an absurd amount of calories to grow, you're wrong. The massive amount of calories is dependent upon the person's genetics. Now, switching gears, back to getting lean. There's this same type of message, probably even more significant when it comes to getting lean, is there's people out there talking about, in order to get lean, you gotta eat. True, you do, you need to eat. But you don't need to eat that many calories. It just depends on the person. The only way that you are going to get lean or lose body fat or lose weight is to be in a caloric deficit, the exact opposite of what we've been talking about. Again, being in a caloric deficit doesn't mean that your metabolism is at 2,000, like that baseline that we were just talking about, and then eating 1,000 calories right off the bat. That's just as stupid as that other scenario where you doubled your calories. But if you're at that 2,000 range where you're maintaining on 2,000 calories, then drop it down to like 1,900 for a week. See where that gets you, and then gauge it from there. However, the message that I want to get across is that you are not damaging your metabolism by eating low calories. The term low calories is completely arbitrary because it's different for every single person. Low calories for me may not be low calories for you. I just gave you an example of a female who weighed about 130 pounds that can eat about 30-40% more calories than me and stay shredded. So really probably more like 40-50% more calories than me if we want to get the same goal out of the matter. And that's a girl who's half my body, less than half my body weight. So again, what's low calorie to her is different from what's low calorie to me, and especially different from what's low calorie for most girls. So the term low calorie doesn't make any sense because the definition of low calorie is going to be completely different for every single person. So I'll use myself as an example, and I've used this example a couple times in videos that I've done. During my prep, my calories generally get as low as like 1,500. And I'm a super heavyweight, national level super heavyweight bodybuilder, 1,500 calories and lots of cardio. I mean, this prep was probably actually the least amount of cardio I've done in a long time. However, I was still doing 35-minute sessions twice a day. So, I mean, over an hour of cardio a day and 1,500 calories 3 days a week. And, you know, I carb cycled, so 1,500 3 days a week, about 1,800 3 days a week, and then I had one high day. So again, that's low. That's what most would consider extremely low calories, especially for a guy. And I'm fine. I was a super heavyweight. I was the biggest person in the entire show that I just did by a long shot. And I grew. So I gained 7 pounds of stage weight in a year and a half. Anyway, you hear all these people talk about, like, if you're eating below X amount of calories, you're damaging your metabolism. Bullshit. You're not damaging anything. You have to eat in a caloric deficit to get lean. It depends on the person how many calories that's going to require, but I promise you, you can go really low and be perfectly healthy, be perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, I guarantee you, if you were to run blood work on a person who's on quote unquote low calories, so long as they're not like overexerting themselves the way a bodybuilder probably would, they're probably much healthier than they are during off season when they're in a caloric surplus. I can almost guarantee you that. There are textbooks, there are medical textbooks. I have a client that went to the, what's the university in New York? Columbia University. She's a med school student that sent me something from one of her med school textbooks talking about, you know, the health benefits of eating less calories. Again, I'm not saying that you need to eat 400 calories a day. By no means am I saying that. What I'm saying is you need to eat the maximum amount of calories you can eat while maintaining a caloric deficit. That number is going to be completely different for everybody. And if you're a dude who heard Juan Morel eats 15,000 calorie cheat meals 3 times a week during his prep, and his diet consists of 5,000 calories a day, and he just gets peeled, that doesn't mean that you can do that. And I can tell you right now, if you're watching this video, you can't do that. There's no one watching this video that can do that, period. Point blank, it's not going to happen. It'll never happen. That's an extreme genetic outlier. Don't worry about that. Don't listen to that. You got to do what's actually going to work for your body. And if you want to test their methods, that's fine. You're going to learn very quickly the hard way that it doesn't work that way. So if you're a female and you have to go as low as 1,900 calories or so for a couple of weeks before a show, don't freak out about that, because it's totally fine. If you eat 900 calories a day the entire year, yeah, that's not smart. Your body is going to be resistant to that. Your metabolic rate's going to slow to compensate for that. That's going to cause problems. But temporarily, in order to get in contest shape, when that's your goal, is to win shows, and you got to get in contest shape, sometimes you got to do that, and it's not unhealthy as long as it's temporary. So same thing with guys. Like, you know, we all hear about the outliers that can eat a ton of food. It's probably not going to be that way for you. You know, a lot of people think I'm an outlier, and I assure you, I am the furthest thing from it. But when people hear that I eat 1,500 calories a day, dude, I'm talking about like 6.5, 7 ounces of protein 6 times a day, like ground turkey, chicken, mostly vegetables, and like a few rice cakes. I mean, that's my diet. It's not that bad. Like, it doesn't, you know, because my metabolism is that way, I'm suffering as much as I should be suffering to get in contest shape. But if your goal is just to lose weight, one, you're not going to have to suffer. The calories that you're eating will become very comfortable, even if they are considered low to other people. So I guess the point being, you can eat in a caloric deficit for an extended period of time and be fine. Just make sure that deficit is not too significant. So don't eat 50% less calories than you need to eat to lose weight. On the converse, when you want to gain weight, don't eat 50% more calories than you need to eat to grow. Prolonged periods of time in a small deficit or surplus are what you need. So whatever that number is going to be individual to you. You know, there may be a lot of people who have very similar numbers to you, but the fact of the matter is, like, don't let anyone tell you that you're damaging your metabolism because you're eating X amount of calories. That's insane. You're rarely ever going to have anyone tell you you're eating too much in the off season, but you can definitely eat too much in the off season. I generally do. You know, let me be transparent. I generally eat more than I need to eat in the off season, and I get fat, and I regret it every time I do it. So, you know, do as I say, not as I do in that situation. But I guess that's really the only point that I wanted to make, is that there is a number of calories that you should not exceed for each individual when you're trying to grow. Being in a absurd caloric surplus is not going to help you. The more food you eat does not translate to more growth. As a matter of fact, there's a new study. I don't know if it's new actually, but there is a study that shows, I think it is new though. There's a study that shows basically that protein synthesis does not increase when you increase your protein intake from 30 grams per meal up to all the way up to 90 grams per meal. So if you're eating 30 grams of protein 5 to 6 times a day, the amount of protein synthesis you're going to achieve does not increase if you were to do 90 grams of protein 5 to 6 times a day, period. So you're not going to grow any more muscle because you're eating that much more protein. And that definitely doesn't, if you're eating more fat and more carbs, that's even worse. So again, eat in a surplus, but let that surplus be minor. Eat in a deficit when you're trying to get lean, but that deficit should be minor. That number is going to be different for everybody. So don't let anyone tell you you're not eating enough, because they don't fucking know. They have no idea what's the right amount of calories for you to eat. You know, your coach should know if you have a good one. Again, there are exceptions, of course. If you're someone with a fast metabolism and a coach has you on absurdly low calories for you individually, that girl that I used for, you know, as an example that I worked with that was eating like, you know, over 3,000 calories, if I were to try to get her even leaner and put her on 1,000 calories, yeah, that's idiotic. That's way too low for her. You know, but someone with a lot slower metabolism, that's probably not that bad. If you're maintaining, if you have a set point metabolic rate at like 1,200, and that's the case for a ton of people. The only way to get leaner is to go lower. Simple as that, or increase the output from cardio or something like that. So again, I think I've made my point. That's about all I'm going to cover with this particular topic. There were a couple questions or comments that I didn't read on the spot, so I'm going to go back and look at those and address those accordingly. Can you be in a caloric surplus and still drop body fat percentage? No, you can't. It's well, let me take that back. If the caloric surplus is extremely small, you can be in a surplus and drop body fat percentage. There's a difference between dropping body fat and dropping body fat percentage, because one way to decrease body fat percentage that people never think about is to gain muscle mass. So if your body fat stays exactly the same, but you increase your muscle mass, your body fat percentage will be lower, obviously, if you just look at the mathematics of it. So being in a small caloric surplus and gaining muscle while fat stays the same will actually technically decrease your body fat percentage. So the way I don't know if you even were asking that specifically, but putting that word percentage in there makes a huge difference. So being in a caloric surplus and dropping body fat, no, you can't really do that. There are some probably extreme genetic outliers that can kind of pull it off. But it's, I mean, almost impossible. Basically, it's impossible. So no, but to decrease body fat percentage, you can, because you can increase muscle mass being in a caloric surplus. But the surplus would have to be relatively small, because if you have a big caloric surplus, you're going to gain some body fat, and that's probably going to accrue faster than muscle mass. So highly unlikely that you would decrease your body fat percentage in a caloric surplus, but it is possible if the surplus is insignificant enough and you're growing, you know, muscle tissue well enough. So, Shaw fully fit. Can you explain insulin sensitivity and its effect on muscle / fat gain / fat loss? Yeah, that's actually almost every client I've ever worked with has probably heard me reference insulin sensitivity countless times. Matter of fact, most of the supplements that I write into people's programming is there for the purposes of increasing insulin sensitivity. it's a big thing. It's a actually really highly overlooked aspect of this whole fitness thing. So basically, insulin sensitivity, in a nutshell, just to explain it as easily as possible, is your muscle cells' receptiveness to glucose. So if you're insulin sensitive and you're eating foods that are converted to glucose, primarily carbs, protein can be converted to glucose, fat unlikely but can be. Basically, it's your muscle cells' ability to uptake that glucose as opposed to it being stored as fat. If all your muscle cells, if your muscle glycogen is completely full and you're still continuing to eat foods that are converted to glucose, you're going to store body fat. The only way to kind of counter that is by training and depleting glycogen and stuff. So you're kind of like taking it in and putting it back. Training is going to take the glucose out of the cell to use for energy. But then, post-workout carbs or food after the fact stored as glycogen kind of puts it back into place. But so the point is, let's just say you're not training, your muscle glycogen is entirely full because you've been eating carbs. Beyond that, you're going to be a little bit insulin resistant, and your body's probably going to be more likely to use that glucose to store it as in fat cells, as opposed, because your muscle cells don't have any more room. It becomes a situation where I've used this analogy with clients. It's like trying to park a car in a parking lot that's completely full. So in order to become insulin sensitive again, you got to empty some of the cars out of the parking lot so that you can park more cars in it. The only way to do that is by like training. Cardio can deplete a little bit of glycogen, but training is going to do it. So that's kind of what insulin sensitivity means. So I think that kind of explains already its effect on muscle building and fat loss. So you want to be as insulin sensitive as possible for both things. If you're insulin sensitive, you can eat more, you can convert more food to glucose because it's just going to go into muscle cell, which is, obviously anabolic. The more glycogen you're able to store and use for energy in your training, the more anabolic you're going to be. And the same goes for fat loss. Is obviously if you're using, carbs and glucose for muscle cells, you're not storing fat, and you don't have to basically put a bunch of calories in and then take them right back out from overdoing the cardio. That was the scenario I explained with eating a ton of calories, eating a massive caloric surplus, and then going and doing a bunch of cardio all off season. That's completely inefficient because it's the same concept. You're basically just overly indulging and then taking it right back out by doing the cardio and then immediately putting it right back in and overly indulging again. When you can stay more insulin sensitive if you just eat less food and don't do that cardio. So that's the best explanation I can give you for that. Hope that explains that pretty well. Anybody have anything else? So this video is going to be a lot more clean and edited and cool. It's going to look a lot cooler on his camera, and then we're going to do it on a YouTube page. We're going to do a lot of other stuff too, like training tutorial stuff, informational stuff like I'm doing in the live video. So anyway, that's it. Thanks again. All right, guys, thanks for watching. If you have any questions or input, just leave it in the comment section.